students of Reddit, what is your best story about the worst teacher you ever had? I had a second grade teacher who argued with me about how to spell my foreign last name. My chemistry teacher in high school was a total dong. He would tell us if we didn't master chemistry, we should start picking out bridges to live under, and how you'll never get another job outside of chemistry. He would call people out in front of the class that had failed an exam, making several girls cry. The icing on the cake was one day, a larger girl asked him if she could go across campus to grab a notebook or something she left there. He said yeah sure, you could use the exercise. He went on personal leave for the entire year, and never came back. Had an engineering teacher who never graded assignments, pretty much glanced at them, and gave a grade based off how neat it looked, not off creativity. Then every subsequent assignment pretty much got the same grade. My magic number was 88/100. In my engineering class my final exam had 23 questions. Every kid in the class got a percent by multiples of 5, 95%, 90%, 85%, which was impossible with 23 questions. Turns out he never graded them and just gave us a grade on how much he liked us. Professor with tenure showed up, talked about baseball and how he's fluent in Chinese for the first 3 weeks of class, wouldn't give us a syllabus the first month, verbally abused us for not understanding what he hadn't taught us, ram-packed 2 months of work in the last 2 weeks before the exam, was surprised how much he had to curve the class up to a B average. Even under tenure he can be fired for that. Tenure just means you can't lose your job unless it's proven that you aren't doing it. When I was in the 12th grade I had an English teacher who was horribly picky with essays. Everything else was fine, but essays were very hard to get good marks on with him. I spent 15 hours writing a simple 3-page essay and finished it a few days before the due date so I could have him check it over. He took it home and said he spent about 15 minutes reading it and only checked off a few grammatical. He said the essay was fantastic, but if I fixed those I would get a very high mark. I did. I failed the essay. The same thing happened for the whole year for every essay so I had to take the course over again in summer school. I had a college professor for physiology that was an arrogant, self-righteous jerk. As finals were coming up, he told us that he wouldn't accept any excuses for being late to the final and that we would fail it if we weren't there at 8 AM. He even told us that it would be a good idea to put the number of a taxi company in our phones in case any of us had car trouble on the morning of the final. So the day of the final, we are all there early, and he walks in 45 minutes late because his wife took his cell phone and his alarm didn't go off. Teacher in high school tried to tell the class that Achilles was a Trojan soldier. I was like no he was Greek. Her no he wasn't. Me yes he was. He fights Prince Hector. Her oh yeah, right. She sent me to the office after class for making her look bad. I got detention for disrespecting her and arguing. The rest of the Iliad lesson after that was watching Troy, not even reading the story. It happens man. I got corrected a few times by students, mind you they were in high school. What's important is how you handle it. I would simply pull my phone out to Google it and thank the student for correcting me, or thank them for trying to correct me. In the 3rd grade we had to do a project that started with a prompt I had a dream that, and I wrote a 2-page story about how I fell into the Harry Potter world and went to Hogwarts for the day. She called a parent-teacher conference and accused me of plagiarism and said I could go to jail for using the Potter characters. This was in 3rd grade. I remember I used to come home crying after her class sometimes and that was the first time I ever cursed. My mom let me call her a B after a particularly rough day. My 3rd grade teacher was probably the worst teacher I'll ever have. My sister had her before me so my mom knew how she was when I was treated meanly too. My mom told me I was allowed to say she was a B, but never to her. I'm glad she understood. The teacher wasn't abusive, she was just mean and bitchy. I don't know if she was the worst, but she did pee me off the most. I had a college professor who never once showed up to class on time. It was a MWF class so only 50 minutes long. She'd regularly show up 30 minutes late, then refuse to dismiss us until her 50 minutes were over. This class was right before lunchtime so no one had another class to get to, but still. So after the first week of this nonsense, some student said something to her right after she arrived late as usual. The teacher got so furious and personally offended that she kicked the girl out of class and told her to drop the course because she wasn't going to teach someone so disrespectful. WTF do you call showing up to your own class 30 minutes late every day? Because I would call that disrespectful. Ms. Witherspoon. When we had her for 7th grade English, she was quirky, a little overdramatic, but not too outrageous. In 8th grade we watched her have a nervous breakdown. By the time we started 8th grade, we had for 2 periods in a row. We didn't have homeroom, but this was pretty much that. Her mood at the beginning of the year was incredibly tense, and as the year progressed, we started getting more combative against her. She had health problems, so you could write some of her behavior off, but not all of it. Midway through the first semester, things started going off the rails. As an introduction to her book about racism, she had us share every racist term we had ever heard and wrote it on the board, then added 10 more. We never read the book. One day she got tired of teaching and assigned quiet reading for the rest of the class, which was about an hour and a half. About a half hour into it, one person coughed, and another laughed quietly. She then shouted, not very loudly because of her health problems, "Do you think I'm a freaking idiot?" She never explained that. The final assignment she gave us was to read a dozen short stories, followed by a test on those stories. I actually read them all, felt great about the test, and was dumbfounded by the F I'd gotten. The progress report came soon after, and it too showed 2 Fs. We had her for 2 periods, she gave 2 grades. I stole the books the short stories came in from the classroom and took them home to grade the test myself, citing sources and page numbers. On her final day, she wanted us to tell her all of the bad things we'd ever heard about her. She'd been around that school for a couple of decades and was never well liked, so there were a lot of stories. She wept as we told her, but encouraged us to continue. The next day, all of her personal belongings were gone from the classroom, and we never saw her again. There was a substitute for the rest of the year, and she quietly retired during the summer. By the time report cards came out, I had 2s in the class, and, in regrading her final test myself, I found that I got 100%. I kept all the books I stole. Edit. Spelling. Second edit. It seems that everyone has a crazy teacher in their pasts. This one was Northern California. I had a math professor from Russia who could barely speak English. He called homework training, and if you didn't understand a problem he would just get mad at you. Growing up, my family was pretty low income. My dad was a bus driver, and my mom worked as a social worker for HHS. My dad's work hours were late night and my mom's early morning, so they hardly got to see each other. We also could never go on vacations because of money and schedule problems. Finally one day, after years of saving, we bought tickets to Disney World, my first official vacation. I still remember to this day how this teacher, 3rd grade, yelled at me that she didn't know how I could have a good time with all the homework she was going to give me. Who goes on vacation during the school year, she was saying. She wound up giving me multiple assignments, including a daily 2-page diary, and daily homework that was way more than what they were even doing in class. My parents were really pissed. They wound up having to get the principal involved. In the end, I still had to do my daily diary. However, all of the other homework was not assigned. Mrs. Rodriguez, if you still exist, I hope you have feasted on many a bag of dongs. In 1960, I was in 4th grade in a public school. As in many schools during this era, we had nuclear attack drills and had to sit under our desks, as if a desk would protect us from a bomb or nuclear fallout. My teacher would make us repeat Bible verses and have us repent our sins as part of the drill to my 9-year-old self. This was terrifying. Well, I'm 62 now and still have nightmares about this. I hate her to this day. Well, going under the desk is mainly to protect from collapsing rubble, and being at floor level under a desk can kind of shield you from broken glass. If the bomb was dropped nearby or on your school, obviously it wouldn't mean crap, but that desk could save a 4th grader's skull from being crushed by a piece of the ceiling. My very first class in high school was English. My teacher was just batshit crazy, condescending, bitchy, just really unpleasant to be around. Her shining moment was the day that she told us that we weren't allowed to drink water in her class because there are many people in our school who are allergic to water, so we have to be considerate of them. I crap you not. I had a teacher in high school who had one of those think as yourself and only yourself you special snowflake mentalities, which is fine to a certain extent, but she took it way overboard. She also taught science, a subject that didn't often support her outlook. For instance, in an effort to get us to think outside the box, she turned the poster of the periodic table upside down, which was great except that I couldn't read the fricking periodic table. We turned in reflections about our labs. How did mixing these solutions make us feel? Then we'd have to connect the experiment to a current event. She's an English teacher now and much happier. This sounds like a story from Wayside School. I had a biology professor who was a former Marine. She barely spoke any English and just seemed crazy. She flipped out on the whole class because she was angry she was getting emails at midnight when she was sleeping. It was an introduction course and she taught it like we were medical students. The class average on the midterm was 32%. I dropped it after that. My graphic design instructor would be dead honest about how she felt about our work, but would also never tell you how to improve. If your work didn't meet her expectations, she would literally write sucks, awful, that's terrible, terrible choice of color on our projects. Shortly after, 90% of classmates would stop showing up to her class. Worst part, apparently I was a top student in her class and she would always pick me to judge my classmates' work. I wanted to kill myself. I was a senior in high school, and I had to retake my 10th grade English class in order to graduate. I had a rocky start my freshman and sophomore year. I kicked my butt into gear for my junior and senior year once I realized how important it was. The sophomore teacher was atrocious. She clearly hated teaching and kids. If you were confused and raised your hand to ask a question on what she was teaching that day, she would yell at you to put your hand down. If you waited until after class, she would yell at you to get out. I was so confused at the stature of this woman. I couldn't even fathom at how she became a teacher in the first place. I desperately needed this class in order to graduate, but my final straw came when we had to do a book report on the importance of poetry. I received my book report back after a couple of days, to which she graded it as an F. I spoke to her after class about it, and she said that I was in a 10th grade class, and I needed to write like a 10th grader. She literally gave me an F because the paper was too well written. I took my paper down to the guidance counselor, explained what happened and demanded that I be transferred to a different 10th grade English classroom, and that I wanted her reported. Sorry for such a long rant, but to this day it still infuriates me why someone would choose to be a teacher, and yet not care about their students in any way. We once had a chemistry teacher who always had to tell a black student to stop talking in class. At one point, she got so pissed, she slammed her textbook on the girl's desk, looked her in the eye, and screamed, "You are as disobedient as your color." She was promptly fired. That doesn't even make sense. My math teacher said okay after every 2 seconds. Someone in my class did a tally of how many times she said okay. It was over 224 in one class. Was in 8th grade in middle school. I had just passed a test permitting me to skip up to a 9th grade level math class. This required me to move from 6th period math to 5th period math, thus switching from 5th period science to 6th period science. Went to tell my science teacher and she freaked out and yelled in my face, "You can't do that," because they didn't talk to me. Went straight to the counselor. He approved of the move. My dad had a nice talk with her. Details regarding your dad's conversation with her. First year stats class. I had a prof who was in his last year before retirement and extremely senile. When it came to his lectures, he spent the majority of them talking about fish and fishing, not statistics. Then on his exams, he made the answer key, where all of the correct answers were colored red, and proceeded to print it out as the exam on a black and white printer. Obviously you could see which answers were correct, without doing the work, and as a result everyone in the class ended up with 100%. Sounds awesome? No. It was scaled so we all got a B, and learned absolutely nothing. TLDR. Statistics prof likes fish, and gives away all the answers. Everyone got scaled to a B. Joke's on you, you learned something about statistics from that B. The professor is sitting in a boat right now, fishing of course, chuckling to himself about the whole senile prank he pulled on his statistics class. In high school my favorite teacher, grade 9 biology fell and was forced to miss the rest of the year. So we had a substitute for 3/4 of the school year. Now this lady knew absolutely nothing about teaching or biology. She also had a thick accent, so it was impossible to understand what she was saying most of the time. The class was out of control, like a freaking zoo. I remember one class some guys in the back broke open a bunch of glow sticks and threw them at the front of the class, spewing neon liquid jizz everywhere. As for me, she hated me. I have no idea why. I wasn't the best student. I didn't really care about the class or subject, but she just despised me, would always call me out for things I wasn't doing and kick me out of class for whispering to my friend next to me. All the while the maniacs in the back are setting fires in the desk. It was insane. During a test one day my pencil became dull and I started fishing in my school bag for my sharpener. She sees my hand rustling around at the bottom of my bag and promptly stands up to walk towards me. This beast wipes the test off of my desk and writes a giant 0 on the paper. I exclaim, but she shuts me up and tells me that I was caught cheating. The students around me all interject, telling her that I wasn't cheating. But I had it with this freaking dumbass teacher, so I gave her the finger and walked out of the class. I just couldn't handle another class with her, so I stopped going. I told the principal what happened and explained that until I was able to retake the test I wouldn't be going to the class. My parents got involved and it was a whole freaking brouhaha that was caused by my entitled piece of crap teacher. Eventually there was a meeting between the principal, vice principal, my mother, father, and I. The teacher didn't say crap. She just sat there with her mouth closed glaring at me, hoping the principal would back her up. She didn't. I retook the test. Can't remember what I got. I probably failed. Fricker though. You know what you got? Justice. Sweet sweet petty justice. Arguably the best kind. The Crusades happened in the 5th 6th century BC. Me. BC stands for before Christ. Yes. Me. The Crusaders were Christian. Yeah. 5th 6th century BC. I just stopped arguing because it was useless. I'd love to see this continue. The B in BC stands for before. Before Christ. There weren't any followers of his to be called Christians. Things that happened before somebody lived can't be named for that person. Before is different from after. Time only moves in one direction. One time, for a linguistic exercise, we counted the letters in the preamble to the Constitution. Like, there are 20 A's, 10 B's, etc. Horrible. Horrible. Edit. Nope. No programming. 7th grade social studies. I had this exact assignment, except for mine I had to write a program and see that would do it for me. There's always my math professor who would say, "It's not my job to teach you, it's your job to teach yourselves." He'd constantly complain about the textbook he had us buy, that he chose to use. It was absolutely a terrible textbook, but it was far better than his lectures, which consisted of him going on about bug procreation, the Golden Gate Bridge, and starfish migration patterns in the Atlantic. He'd get angry whenever anyone asked him a question, and I don't think throughout the entire math class he went through a single full problem. Had a college prof whose textbook consisted of a binder filled with PowerPoints, photocopies of 2 old textbooks, and other random crap. I was doing a homework assignment one night. One question told me to refer to a chart on page X of the book. The book ends 20 pages before page X. It also references page Y, which turned out to be a PowerPoint that had nothing to do with the assignment. I emailed that prof that night. This was a Thursday, assignment was due Monday, asking where the chart was and explaining that the directions were wrong. An hour before class on Monday, no response. So I do the best I can from my notes and turn it in. 3 hours after the class is over, I get a reply email from professor. He calls me an idiot, saying I should have known it anyway, and also saying that he knew the assignment referenced pages X and Y. Ended up getting those questions wrong, along with a good majority of the class. I had a lot of teachers in high school who would use these scrapbook style textbooks. I hated it. They always referenced something that didn't make it into the final cut, often had conflicting information on different sources, wonky formatting, some shrunk text to make it fit on the page that could never be read. I had an AP chemistry teacher who was teaching that level of course for the first time. He was horrible. He had the other AP chemistry teacher even come in and teach us a few lessons he couldn't explain properly. He would take off points on my exams because I did the mathematics in a different way than him. So he said he couldn't be sure I wasn't cheating, since all my answers were correct, because he didn't understand my work. I eventually just started mailing it in for the rest of the year. When I had gotten accepted and enrolled in undergraduate, he one day said to me, "You are going to fail out of college after your first semester." April of my senior year of college, I sent him a copy of the letter I had received from a law school that offered me a full scholarship. And he said to himself, good thing I was brutally honest with him. It must have motivated him to succeed. And then he patted himself on the back and had a good day. I had a math professor straight out of somewhere over the oceans in Russia's general area, taught in US. Nobody could understand a word she said, so on the first day the whole class laughed hysterically. Homework was optional. You could use your calculators on your phones during tests, got mad at you for asking questions, and the best part is that she had to pass the majority of the class in order for her to keep her job. I crap you not. I got answers wrong on tests, but she marked them right because I did a portion of the work correctly. So I don't know if this is the worst teacher or the best teacher. Perception is key. How I miss EIU. TLDR. Teacher that hated me tried to play football with us at recess. I made him look like a fool on the football field and took an excessive celebration push to the ground from him that I hung over his head all year. Mr. N from elementary school. I was a hyper kid, I'll give him that, but he was a dong. He was about 28 and a brand new teacher. He was super nice to all the girls and but to the guys. I was his most hated kid by far though. Grade 7. He made me put my desk in the cloakroom. I was only allowed to move my desk when he wrote stuff on the blackboard, and he'd give me detention for just about anything and everything. That man cost me watching more G.I. Joe cartoons than anyone else in my life. And G.I. Joe used to be good back then. One day at recess he decided to play touch football with us. I caught a pass in the open field and only had one man between myself and end zone. Mr. N. There was no way in the world he was going to let me beat him and thought I was an easy tag. Well, I put the move of a grade 7's life on him and actually caused him to stumble. I took off running down the sideline, but he caught up to me again pretty quick. So I hit the brakes and he flew right by, but was again between me and the goal line. I went inside outside on him right on the line and took it to the house. Touchdown. In your face, Mr. N. I was dancing around and my team went crazy. They all ran down while I was doing the icky shuffle or something in front of Mr. N, taunting him as he was trying to walk back to his team. He was soupy and I wasn't dropping it, so he shoved me to the ground and said, "Frick off." My entire team just stopped running and stood there, open-jawed. Awesome 10 witnesses. I held that over his head all year. I got to move my desk out of the cloakroom even. Nothing like a little physical abuse and swearing at a 12-year-old to even the odds and put them back into my favor. I didn't get detention again either. Edit for getting grades and ages mixed. This guy put the TLDR at the beginning of his comment. Give the man an upvote, damn it. In elementary school, before religion was removed from the curriculum, I had a teacher who repeatedly gave me detention every time I asked a stupid biblical question during religion class. My parents are atheist Chinese immigrants. I had no idea who Moses was, how it was possible for him to part the Red Sea, or how Jesus was able to turn water and wine and resurrect himself. She looked at me as if I were the Antichrist. Eventually religion was removed from the curriculum and ethics made much more sense to my 10-year-old mind. I had a history professor my first year of college who could come to class late every day and show us movies every class. I learned absolutely nothing, and when he did actually lecture, he made no attempt to hide his political biases. For the grand finale, our final for the class was a 15-page paper due to him by email. About 2 weeks before grades were due to the university, I didn't do the paper. Purposefully, I sent him a blank Word document. This professor emails me literally 2 hours before grades were due those 2 weeks after I submitted it, telling me he's having trouble reading the paper. Clearly this guy didn't even plan on spending time reading or grading our work, so I didn't respond. Got a B in the class, with that final paper being one of 2 assignments we'd had during the entire semester. TLDR. Didn't do the final. got a B anyway. I had a teacher who occasionally got mad and threw shoes at us. I had a theater teacher who routinely threw desks. I had a biology teacher in high school who was bat crap crazy. She was sex obsessed and talked about it constantly. Mind you, this was a private Christian school, so most of the girls in this freshman class were pretty scarred. One example of her bat crap craziness was the day we were dissecting a frog. My partner was out sick like she always was on the days of dissections. So my teacher decided to be my partner. We begin cutting open the frog, but she was too caught up on finding its genitals to move on. Everyone in class was taking pictures, jotting down their notes, making sketches, while I was stuck watching this teacher obsessively try to find the frog's private hole. Well, she found what she was looking for and stuck the end of the scissors in the frog, then proceeds to scissor frick the frog while I'm staring in disbelief. Everyone else was finishing up and we had hardly started. Then she says, "I've always wondered what it'd feel like to break a frog's back." She grabs the frog's head in one hand, back end in the other, with the open torso facing me across the table, and snapped the frog's back. A stream of dead frog juice squirts directly into my eye. She just says, "Oh, you should probably go clean that out in the bathroom." By the time I was done flushing my eye, everyone had already gone to lunch. Mrs. Bat Crap Crazy made me finish the dissection by myself because she was eating her lunch at her desk. I barely made the end of lunch and was too pee and grossed out to eat. Talked to the principal about her. Found out there had already been dozens of complaints against her. She didn't work there again the following year. Oh, one time, she came to school with one crawdad toofy for the dissection because she left them out on the table last night and the cat got to one. She was also a hoarder and apparently lost most of our homework and her school computer in her living room. Thinking about her makes my skin crawl. I had a teacher who yelled at us for humming during a test. It was in fact she who was humming. My history teacher was an idiot, and I mean, an idiot. She took 10 points off a 5-point question. Why are there so many salt plains in West Africa? Because, in her words, a very smart student like you should be more specific. It's Northwest Africa, not just West Africa. What the frick? Edit. I didn't read before posting. My apologies for the rampant typos. Despised my 12th grade English teacher because she was one of the worst speakers of English I'd ever encountered. She would routinely read aloud to the class. These are high school seniors, and Ms. Collins would read aloud to them at least twice a week for the entire class. We all bristled, but I was probably most annoyed at having to sit through it. So, she's reading a book about some village in Africa. A children's book really. Folks in the little village didn't have enough to eat. Ms. Collins didn't slow down one bit after pronouncing the word underfed. 2 syllables, meaning these people did not have the required amount of derf. My hand was up pretty fast. Ms. Collins, maybe we should do something for these people. Maybe we should take up a collection of derf. At least there was no reading aloud in the principal's office. I had a geography teacher who was Hawaiian. I live in Hawaii, and we learned nothing about geography, only Hawaiian culture. Before we could enter the class we would have to do a Hawaiian chant. This was every day we had this class. When it was my turn to chant I pronounced all the words correctly, but she said I had a mainland accent. I'm originally from California, so I couldn't do the chant right. She made me read the chant 7 times and I was the only one who couldn't do it. Everyone laughed at me and I cried at the door. That was the only class I ever got a F in. In college my friend took Chinese to get an easy A since she grew up in Taiwan and spoke fluent Chinese in 2 different dialects. Teacher was from mainland China near Beijing. They have a very different accent. The teacher gave her a D because she didn't speak with a Beijing accent. Not a terrible teacher, but our class conditioned our math teacher, differential equations, to teach on the left side of the room. When he would walk to use the right side of the whiteboard, the entire class would look uninterested and bored. Eventually we trained him to use only one side. He finally caught on at the end of the semester when he walked to the right side of the board to get a marker and saw everyone change their posture. Though most of the teachers I have had in my past have been great, there was Ms. F, my high school chemistry teacher. The first day of high school chemistry the teacher usually explains the curriculum and standards of their classroom etc. The teacher started off her class with this sentence: "I am not a teacher, I am a facilitator." From that point on I knew it was going to be a rough year. She never helped students after class or during lunch with anything. She was a sour divorced woman who hated all men because of this. Halfway through the year, a female student who was usually in trouble took it upon herself to take the foil wrapper from a stick of gum and shape it as if it were a plug being inserted into an outlet. The teacher hadn't noticed her fiddling with it all class, but the class did. Needless to say, she inserted it into the outlet and it made a loud pop and lights flickered. The teacher saw it in the outlet because all of the kids were staring right at it, and because I sat next to this chick, she came up to my desk, assumed it was me, took my books off my desk, threw tea across the room, and demanded me to go to the house principal. Anytime I tried to explain my side of the story, she'd just talk over me and ignore me. I left and had explained the scenario to the principal, and she asked the class what truly happened. I was in the clear. From that point on I couldn't even sneeze in her class without her giving me beady eyes or yelling at me. I was happy to find out she passed away when I was in college. Frick that bee. Alright, it's about time I share my story. Last year I had an engineering professor who was just the worst teacher ever. He taught mechanics of materials, and from day one I knew he was simply not good at teaching the subject. He was very monotone and really just could not explain things well at all. Well, fast forward about a month through the course when we had our first midterm. Everyone in the 300-person lecture was pretty afraid because we all had no idea what to expect. Well, the teacher comes running in all sweaty about 8 minutes after the class was supposed to begin. You could tell he just printed out all the tests. He was one of those teachers who was all paranoid about students cheating, so he printed out 3 different versions of the test. The teacher then proceeded to pass out the test. He didn't just pass them all out by giving each row a stack of tests, but instead went to each student personally, gave one a test, then went to the next student, stumbled around his papers and gave the next student a different test. I crap you not. He did this for every person in the 300-person lecture. Well, I was sitting in the back of the class, so I didn't get my test until around 15 minutes after the first person in the class. After getting the test I realize it's fucking impossible. Every question was just ridiculously difficult and everything was shittily hand-drawn, which made things even more difficult. By this point I am just looking around at everyone else in the class and people look pee off. I also noticed people are constantly going up to him and asking questions about the test. About 15 minutes after everyone has been working on the test, he makes his first announcement. Okay everyone, so the dimensions on the first question is incorrect. It's supposed to be blah and not blah. At this point everyone is just like, okay frick this, but we still keep working cause there is nothing else we could do. 10 minutes later he makes another announcement about how there was something incorrectly written on the test. I'm just so pee at this point I didn't even care about how I was going to do on the test cause I knew everyone else would probably fail with me. People also just keep flooding him with questions, and now the teacher just looks like he is about to shoot himself in front of the entire class. Then, 45 minutes into taking the test, he makes his final announcement. Yeah, so this test isn't really working how I planned, so I am cancelling it, and we will have a retake next week. And that was the start of a great semester not learning mechanics of materials. TLDR. Had professor who couldn't do anything right. Here's my experience with 2 separate professors at the university I'm currently attending. One of them, an art history prof from freshman year, was easily the most obese person I've ever seen. Ever. That's not the bad part. Obviously he can choose to live his life however he wants, but it made him slow and inactive. The entire class would be spent in the dark, with him not moving from his seat, going through slides of art. He would get really upset with us when we didn't know the answer to his poorly worded questions, but the worst of it was that, because he was so heavy, he would get winded from talking. Every few words was broken up by this drawn out hissing inhale, and this pieces, hiss, from the Renaissance era, hiss, and it would take him forever to get through a sentence. Needless to say, I slept through most of the class. Happy ending. All our tests were take home. Another teacher, who taught motion graphics, had us do SAR animations. I did mine pro drug use and took the opportunity to make it about the show Breaking Bad. It was all about how people should smoke M to save Walter White. Yada yada. After I was done, he asked me if I'd ever smoked M. I told him no, and he said good, don't. It feels like taking a brick to the face. Like smoking a permanent marker. Huh, you don't say. The worst teacher I ever had was when I was in grade 2. She whacked my knuckles with a ruler because I was left-handed. She insisted I absolutely could not write left-handed. If I handed in anything that was written anything left-handed I would get a 0. The very first parent-teacher meeting we had that year, my teacher took my parents and very seriously told them that I needed to be sent all the way back to kindergarten to have my entire educational process started over from scratch because the teachers before her made the mistake of allowing me to learn left-handed. My parents just waited for her to stop talking. Then they said, "You're freaking crazy person. This is balls. He's left-handed. He is going to stay that way. And you have a problem with it, we're pulling him out of the school." The teacher pleaded with my parents saying they were making a terrible mistake. If I grew up left-handed I was going to grow up to be a screwed up psycho. My parents stood their ground, kicked that crazy bee to the curb and transferred me not to another school but to another class. Now I'm glad to say I'm a proud serial killer with a deep freezer full of human parts, and I'm earning my doctorate in the Church of Satan. No wait, I'm an administrator in a hospital and teach a class at a local college in computer language skills. Left-handed. Which do you think is true? Kinda long, but here we go. I had this philosophy professor who came to clear 40 minutes late to a 1-hour 15-minute class. The only reason I stayed because I had a math class immediately after and had nothing better to do. Anyway, he shows up and is apologizing to the 4 of us who actually stayed. Next class I walk in and he is playing the guitar for roughly 10 minutes after class should have started. He then sets the guitar down and goes on this long rant on how he cannot believe everyone had left when he was only 15 minutes late, and how come after 5 minutes no one came to his office to remind him we had class. After 5 minutes of ranting, some girl raises her hand and says, "So you want us to tell you how to do your job? If I showed up 40 minutes late to work I'd be fired." He then responds, "You're a moron and have a crappy job." This roughly goes on for 20 minutes and then another student raises his hand and says, "Can we just get to the lecture?" He promptly responds, "You're an idiot. Do you not realize this is my class and this is part of the lecture?" By the time he finished his rant there was 10 minutes left in class and let us all go. The even odder thing was the next lecture he acted like nothing happened. I won't go into details, but my 10th grade English teacher ensured I would fail her class. Once I put 2 and 2 together I went up to her and said, "You may fail me, but I'll just take summer school, get an easy A and move on with you being nothing but a minor inconvenience in my life." First time in my life a teacher kicked me out of class. Life proceeded as I predicted and 4 years later my best friend's little sister amusingly left a note on the last day of class which read, "My name says frick you," written in glittery pink with hearts and smiley faces. I didn't expect her to actually do it when I made this suggestion. My 4th grade elementary school teacher was by far the worst to me. I don't know what I did to this woman to make her hate me, but she ruined a perfectly good vacation. My parents were planning on taking my sister and I to Hawaii for 2 weeks. So, of course, I go to her and get the materials that we would cover while I was gone, and she gives me some papers and problems reading in the textbook. Just normal elementary school vacation procedure. My parents had a work now party later mentality, so they made me get to work on my homework almost as soon as we touched down so I could get it out of the way. Turns out, she gave me a lot of work to do. Even my parents were like, WTF, but they're not the type to complain to the teacher and rather just make me do the work. I had to set aside like 4 hours every day to do my homework, which is a lot of time for a 4th grader in Hawaii. I was even still working on it on the plane ride home. Then when I go back into class I had a huge sense of pride because I had done all of the work this demon teacher had given me. I had beaten her. However, she pulled some crap I won't forget. Turns out, she gave me too much work, so I ended up being ahead of the rest of the class. Rather than just let me sit there and refresh myself with her lessons, she assigned me more work, which was basically just more difficult questions because I already knew the basics. God, I hated her so much. Ended up getting an A in her class, so she can suck it. Serious, teachers of Reddit, what red flags have you seen in your students? What happened? I'm a technology teacher, design and make. I had an 11-year-old student who was terrible at using scissors and couldn't thread a needle. She had very high grades academically, but something didn't seem quite right. I recommended she receive special assistance and a referral, and it turns out after testing that she had very little spatial awareness and almost no hand-eye coordination. After calling the parents in, we found that her mother was paralyzed and in a wheelchair. Only dad had come to parent interviews etc. And dad was very busy working to support them both. So no one had ever played any physical games or activities with her. She hadn't developed in this area and was intelligent enough to hide these shortcomings in previous school activities. Not a difficult fix. Lots of time doing crafts, throwing and catching balls, that kind of thing needed, but something that could have really held her back in the future. This sort of red flag would never have occurred to me, certainly different from all these angry sociopath kids. My mom was a second grade teacher and had a little boy in her class that would go full redrum and draw crazy things on his dry erase board. He would write things like kill with images of dead classmates. Upon asking the student why he was writing these things, he just replied with "she's telling me to." The scariest part was the boy was absolutely terrified. He didn't want to draw any of these things but felt obligated by this woman. My mom recommended him for a psyche eval and turns out he had severe schizophrenia. I had a teacher tell us, the entire classroom, that she doesn't send letters or notes home regarding a student's behavior because she once had a student come back the next day with bruises. I'm honestly so thankful for teachers like this. I didn't do too well on a bio test once, and my teacher wanted me to get it signed. Once she saw my hesitation, she withdrew immediately, asked if I would be in danger if I had it signed, and then never sent anything home again. Bless her. As an early years teacher, the worst thing I've seen is a child trying to hump others. For example, a child bends over, he walks up behind and thrusts into them. He gets on top of a child and proceeds to hump them, generally walking up behind them and weirdly thrusting his pelvis into others, pinning children down into corners and doing this. Sweet kid, but that behavior rang alarm bells. I reported it on 3 separate occasions before a report was taken from me, and it went, supposedly, further up the chain. Always suspected his sister was in fact a young mum, as the mother was nowhere to be seen. I met her twice in 2 years of caring for him. Forgot to say he once did this to my head. Had a high school student who was a well-known white supremacist wear a bulletproof vest to school one day. Quietly called administration to come take him from class. His father complained, "Where in the dress code does it say he can't wear a bulletproof vest?" That was a big red flag. Later that year, kid was expelled for extorting money from other kids by threatening them with a screwdriver. A year later, that student got shot in the face and lost his entire nose, and he's now in prison. I have a 7th grade student this year who bugged the heck out of me. He was that kid. He smelled bad, was disrespectful and disruptive, and generally made life miserable for us. Then, we found out about his background. At a young age, his mother tried to kill him several times. She got drunk and chased him with a knife, and he only escaped by locking himself into the bathroom. She tried to drown him. She used to put out cigarettes on him. Currently, he lives with his alcoholic father, who obviously hates the kid. He told me the other day that he spent the weekend going to AA meetings with both of his parents. I've made it a point to be kind to him now. I take a minute every day to talk with him and praise every positive action I see. I hope to make school something positive for him, because I can only imagine the heck he goes home to. Nota bene, I worked in a school for seriously emotionally disturbed children as an intern, so this is from the red flag already noticed department. 8-year-old with his own giant bodyguard who followed him around to protect other children from him. He was dangerous. 7-year-old who had never spoken one word due to abuse. 8-year-old with one leg shorter than the other due to mother breaking it when he was an infant and no medical attention. -7-year-old who constantly tried to molest other kids because that was the only love he'd known. That was my entire classroom. These kids broke my heart every day that they persevered and kept trying to learn and yet had no real future ahead of them. Yes, there are miracles, but these kids wouldn't see too many of those. Worst mistake I ever made was deciding to pursue my original career rather than go into said teaching. Very, very rewarding work. I was grading papers, and one of my students was exhibiting all the red flags that she intended to harm herself in the paper. She had turned it in days previously, and I had seen her looking down that morning, So I rushed her paper down to our school psychiatrist. She moved to pull the student out of class, but she had ditched school halfway through the day. Police were dispatched and caught her literally seconds before she carried out her plan. Thank God I didn't put off grading another day. On behalf of a lot of people, thank you for deciding to grade that day. I taught children with severe behavior disorders in a self-contained room for 15 years. Most will end up with a felony record, which was confirmed when I later taught at a jail and saw a few of them, but a certain few I plan on seeing on the channel one of these days. One of them would poop and hide his poop wherever he could, in his pockets, desk, etc. He had been physically shamed and gave a really bad vibe towards younger kids. He was in 5th grade. Of course, the white trash bus driver sat him in the back of the bus with preschool kids. When I told the bus driver this was a bad idea, she reported me to my principal saying I was bad-mouthing a student. Needless to say, the student was caught sexually abusing a 3-year-old girl a couple of years later and now is serving a long felony prison sentence for other abuses he perpetrated once he was 18. The bus driver and I had another run-in, but luckily she quit before I did. That is just one of 4 stories where the red flag was waving like crazy. May have to share a couple more. My colleague is a speech and language therapist and was working with a child with very poor attendance at appointments and a very poor background. The kid was 4 years old when she started seeing my friend after her teacher referred her in. The girl had really poor language skills and could barely hold a pen, but my colleague noticed her teeth were really bad and that she drooled a lot. Chatted to mum a bit more about her diet at the next appointment, and it turned out the girl wasn't eating solid food. She had only ever been given milk with a bottle. She was taken into foster care with her little sister not long after that, and they will stay in foster care till they're 18. Sadly, she had to have most of her baby teeth removed, but the couple caring for them are amazing and they're hoping to adopt them both. QHT the frick. Once had a parent find out that I'm gay, and B, I have some music industry contacts. They immediately offered me unlimited, unsupervised access to their 16-year-old son in exchange for helping him break into the music business. I was 35. I reported them immediately. So, I work in an elementary school in a very rough neighborhood. It gets way too real all the time. I think the first time this happened was when I witnessed a group of kindergartners very casually discussing the times they'd seen people get shot. Kid in elementary school who is just so angry all the time for no reason. He doesn't seem to feel any empathy for others. He saw another kid crying because they were upset about something and he just sat there smiling. I was giving a lesson one day and he walked over to ask a question, as I'm giving the class instructions, and I asked him to sit down and I'd help him in just a minute. He stomped back to his seat yelling about how he hates me and this school because no one cares and we're all useless. This is a nearly daily occurrence. If you tell him he has to do something he doesn't want to do, he will yell, throw things and generally just melt down. He can't deal with life in a typical way. He always seems to be scowling. I feel bad for him because it has to be hard to be him. That kid really needs a therapist like yesterday. Lots of the usual about abuse, mental illness, poverty, etc. The one a lot of folks may not know about is the phone numbers. If a parent can't be bothered to keep a way to contact them updated with the school, we're going to be dealing with a headache of a student for the year. 20 years ago I had a kid in my kindergarten class that kicked my hamster. It was in one of those plastic ball things. He was a mean angry kid. He is in jail now. Sadly you could see it coming even then. Honestly, the kids I've taught who've gotten into serious trouble, one in particular was just sentenced to 6 years for debauchery, never showed any red flags. That's the scariest thing about teaching in my opinion. Poor hygiene always makes me wonder what the home life is like. I mean, some 14-year-olds just stink, but when their hair is consistently greasy, teeth unbrushed, dirty and long fingernails, makes your heart break a little. My mum is a primary school teacher in Ireland, and she taught a kid in the 90s I think who was continually getting in trouble for little things and whose mother didn't give a crap what he got in trouble for. He killed his mother and as far as I know he's still in prison. I was putting my preschoolers down for nap near Christmas time, So we're all talking about what they want for Christmas or Hanukkah. We had 2 Jewish students, so I discussed them both equally. One student, who was living his grandparents because his mother was abusive, told me he wanted to play video games. Oh, like on a TV or in your hands, like a DS. He was 5. He sat up, very excited to tell me the story of how he used to have a DS and it was awesome. But one day some men broke into the house and stole it. It was so heartbreaking, especially because he seemed to react as if it happens a lot. I called his grandparents and got permission, but my husband let me give him his old DS he didn't use anymore and all the games he had for it. Kid in grade 1 had intentions of killing people and burning the school down. Not too sure how serious he was. I know he has older siblings, but they weren't troublemakers. When other students started passing the word around he was gonna do these things, the school eventually expelled him. I don't know all the details of him being expelled. I do know his brother left the school a few years later, wasn't expelled. Haven't seen or heard of him since he was a little boy. When I taught abroad, one of the brightest and most liked students disappeared one day after a couple of weeks with what seemed like a bad cold. Not really a red flag, I suppose, but related. It was a one-room schoolhouse in a fairly remote village. Apparently, her mother accused the lunch lady of putting a spell on her daughter and pulled her out. Obligatory, not a teacher, but my grandmother. My grandmother taught 3rd grade for over 40 years. She loved every minute of it, except for this one kid. His name was Jason. She described this kid as a psychopath. She said he would always draw pictures of knives, guns and death on the desks. One time he tried to cut himself with scissors. Another time he tried to stab another classmate in the chest with a sharpened stick. Of course, she reported every incident to the administration. But this was in a time before Columbine, so they did nothing other than suggesting counseling. During a parent-teacher conference, it was revealed that his parents lived in fear of him because he would hoard sharp objects in his room and threaten to stab anyone who tried to get near him. His parents also revealed that he killed animals for fun. Anyways, this kid was later charged with torturing and murdering 6 different women and went to prison for a long time. I've got a 14-year-old male student that loves everything to do with war and death. The first time I saw his writing, I was shocked. He was writing about killing people, recently helping students around the room, and I see his work. Which is nicer, a sniper rifle or a bomb? Normally a kid like that would be thrown out, but this is Japan. Crap don't work like that. From what I've heard about America, I'm sure he would be expelled by now. Scary thing is that he looks like a normal kid. A kid always thinking about murder. So apparently this is normal. Guess I should have talked about the kid that, in the middle of class, would stand up and jump onto the windowsill and act like an animal before jumping out the window. When I asked my Japanese co-teacher, he just said, yeah, he's just like that. I don't find this too rare. 2 chances. He's gonna be a murderer, or he's going to be a brilliant gore writer who I'll probably follow like a cultist. Graded a lab report by a SE Asian kid, then graded another later that was eerily similar down to the typos. Noticed it was another SE Asian kid. Talked to my fellow TAs, compared the papers of the first 2 Asian kids' friends, and before long there were literally dozens of nearly identical lab reports all across the department. You know, they were all cheating together because they had the same writing errors. You haven't known chaos until dozens of Asians are harassing you in the department because they think it's xenophobic to flunk most of the Asians in an OChem class. Department laughed them out, thankfully. As far as I know, the ringleaders were removed from the university. They might have not been if they had apologized, but they were obnoxious and refused to take responsibility. And everyone else failed the course and went on academic probation. If you're gonna cheat, at least rewrite the lab report you're sharing with 50 people. It's not always the loud ones that act out either. My parents started fighting when I was 10 and my mom started telling me all these things she suspected my father was doing behind her back. It really changed my view of my dad and caused a huge strain on our relationship for years. In the end, she ended up being the one cheating. I was tired and came to school and would fall asleep in class and fail tests. No one seemed to care. I spent all of my time trying to figure out what I could do to make them see eye to eye and understand each other. It consumed me and caused me to sink into depression and anxiety. I felt like I had failed because I couldn't fix it. Sometimes I still feel guilty now for not being able to save everyone. My little brother still hasn't come back from it. TLDR. It's not always the angry and loud ones. And don't fight in front of or through your children. I was a teacher at a preschool, and one 4-year-old girl liked to play horsey with the boys during free time. Only she would make them lay on their backs and bounce up and down on them. And that's how we found out her dad was abusing her. I'm not quite a teacher, but I look after a group of 8th graders. I'm a prefect. One of them was a really angry kid who would always try to fight people. He would never study, despite the protests of his family, and hated school. Most people thought he was just an angry kid, until one day he let slip that he'd been self-harming and had suicidal thoughts. He withdrew from school to get counseling help and we haven't seen him since. As we were walking to the library, a student noticed a baby bird had fallen out of a nest. He proceeded to pick the baby bird up and bite its head off. Seriously. After an out-of-town track meet, the coach took my sister's team to have their picture taken at one of those places where they could dress up and do a theme picture. The way my sister tells it, the girls wanted to dress up as something wholesome but the coach was very insistent that they do the Wild West theme. They did, and so he dressed as a sheriff and 20 of these 14-18-year-old girls dressed as Wild West prostitutes. My parents were obviously furious. When a kid shows up with a couple cuts, ain't no deal. When a kid starts showing up with cuts up their wrist and arms, maybe keep an eye on it. When the number or cuts and scars all over the kid just keep getting higher, and the kid who was once a 90+ average student is dropping to near failing, something is probably up. From the POV of a student, I tried killing myself once and was admitted to the hospital. It was this whole big thing and I missed a lot of school from it. Most of my teachers were understanding that since I basically just vanished from school, something serious had happened. But I had one teacher who assumed I had dropped the class and decided to completely disregard me as a student in that class. I ended up failing that class because she refused to be understand of my situation regardless of how good my grades were before everything went to crap. Basically what I am saying is that to all the teachers on this thread, a little reaching out when a student starts to pull away can make a huge difference. My mom worked as a special education teacher's aide when I was in elementary school. There were a lot of sad stories, Down syndrome kids who wore the same filthy clothes, underpants and all, for an entire week, and there were some that made me realize the world could be a truly terrible place. One of the worst I can remember involved a profoundly disabled girl. She was a near drowning victim and was left blind, deaf, and severely intellectually impaired, who was found to have gonorrhea. She was 11. And the reason it was discovered was because my mom saw genital discharge when she changed this child's diaper and reported it. I have no idea what happened to this poor girl. Maybe her next foster family was better. Maybe she went to a group home. During my student teaching, a little boy, 3, walked up behind me, smacked my butt, and said, "Nice butt, sweetie," made the click click noise and walked away. Fast forward to about 3 weeks after that. Same classroom kid comes over and grabs my boobs. Apparently he has a single father that doesn't keep his activities away from Jania. I teach at a private PS8 Catholic school in New England. Just last week I had a kindergartner, age 5, walk up to a framed group picture, hold his hands like a gun, and shoot each person individually, moving down the line, slowly, looking each person in the face before the shooting motion. All the right steps were taken after this, but I couldn't believe my eyes. A girl kept getting in fist fights with her girlfriend. I taught both of them and begged them to stay apart. They broke up and graduated in June. One was murdered by her boyfriend in October. I taught in a small primary school island, 35 kids in the school, 14 in my class, age 9-12. After the Christmas holidays we got a new kid in from another school, a 9-year-old. No reason given for the change of schools during the school year even though he was coming from a school that was only 5-10 minutes away and closer to his house. On his first day I tried to get him settled, label all his books, show him around, introduce him to the other kids, tell him about our routines. He had no interest. I tried talking to him. Are you excited? Are you nervous? His response was I don't get nervous. He had no interest in interacting with the other kids. He made no attempt to make friends. He'd throw evil looks at kids in the class etc. The World Book Day came up a few weeks later and they had to dress up as their favorite character and bring in their favorite book. He brought in Five Nights at Freddy's, along with a mask. I had never heard of it but given his very low ability level I was surprised he was reading such a big, complicated book. I don't think he could read it at all. He just wanted to show it off. I was a little unnerved by it and looked it up, realizing that it's pretty scary stuff for a 9-year-old. But I had 10-year-old in the class playing GTA etc so I'll let it go. Fast forward a few weeks and they are doing a dramatic piece for 1916. They developed a character and wrote diary entries as the character. His diary was covered in red blood. His entry was about seeing his family being killed and how happy it made him. Then he decided to take revenge on the killers and stabbed them. Then killed himself. A bit odd for a 9-year-old. So I had a look at his free writing copy. A copy they write in every day that I don't check for spelling, grammar etc. To encourage a love of writing. It was all talk of killing himself and others. Creepy stalking a la Five Nights at Freddy's. Hunting people down and killing them. Big constant talk in the background of kill me now. I need to die. I brought it straight to the principal. Made an appointment to speak to the parents and called the psychologist. Ma'am told me she thought he'd grown out of it. Sorry, what? I couldn't believe she knew about it. Apparently his older brother is autistic and always talks of suicide and he picked it up and would repeat what he heard. Paige didn't understand my concern at all. She didn't want to be referred to the mental health unit available and didn't want me to talk to him about it. I finished up in that school a few months later, with him being under the attention of the psychologist. But without the parents' permission not much could be done from what I was told. The kid really gave me the creeps. I didn't think he was suicidal. I got the feeling that he wanted someone to see it and to watch their reaction. TLDR. I had a 9-year-old sociopath in my class, I think. For privacy purposes, I will call the student Sally Smith. I was starting my 3rd year of teaching. The charter school asked that we have home visits with the students either before the school year began up until 2 weeks into the year. The CEO really stressed going to their homes. I honestly don't feel as if this is a safe practice. I see how beneficial it is. However, that's a fine line to cross. This particular family wanted to meet at the school instead of at their home. My first red flag was when we introduced ourselves. The child pulled out a dry erase board with all the strategies I could use to help her behavior. She informed me that to get her attention I could call her Ms. Smith. Remember, she's 8. She said her last teacher did that and it worked. She had an unhealthy obsession with Chick-fil-A as well. She had trigger words that would send her running around the room. Chick-fil-A. Death. Dying. Dead. I said, deadline once and there she went, flipping chairs and running. I ended up allowing her to run around the gym in the mornings and at times she would just fall asleep afterwards. At one point, when it got really terrible, we separated her from the rest of the class into a guidance room. You could hear her kicking the door and screaming from down the hall. The mother was never in the picture, so when we called dad, his amazing advice was, I don't know. Do whatever you do with crazy people. She was taken out of the school into a classroom that could suit her. I had heard later on that she moved in with her grandma and was essentially kicked out of the specialty class. I have no clue where she has ended up. Teachers of Reddit. What is the most awful parent you ever had to deal with at a parent-teacher conference? The worst was a mother who threatened to pull her daughter out of the school system if she wasn't given the lead soprano role in the high school's Christmas concert. Her daughter had auditioned, like everyone else, but didn't have either the voice or skills required for the part. The student understood this and agreed with the decision. It was her mother that turned it into a confrontation, believing her daughter to be an opera star in the making. 5th grader with a ton of potential and an awesome personality. He was one of my favorite students. but chronically unprepared and always behind on homework. Mom comes in for conference and makes excuses for him, blames me for giving confusing assignments, not accurate, and tells me how she can't help manage his HW because she has 2 other kids to worry about. For example, grandma picks up kids and drops them at brother's baseball practice. My student leaves backpack in grandma's car. Mom picks up kids after practice. Her conclusion was, why should brother miss out on baseball because he has siblings? After about 5 minutes of this, I stopped her and turned to the kid. I asked him if he thought he could be doing more, even if it's on his own, and he said that he could. I told him I thought so, too, and thanked them for coming in. Next day at school, I told him that I thought he was a great person who had a ton of potential and that he was going to have to make things happen for himself. He totally understood what I meant. It broke my heart. I was an art teacher at a conservative Christian high school and once had a parent tell me I should act and dress less young because she suspected her son had indecent thoughts about me. Being 21 and in my first year of full-time teaching after uni, I was really taken aback by her critique and asked her if she could explain herself a bit better. She then suggested I'd try cutting my hair in a more modest model and dye it darker. I'm a natural blonde. There was a pretty conservative dress code in place for teachers, but according to her, someone like me should exaggerate that a bit more to hide my shame. She then looked me up and down and sighed. To be honest, I don't think they should hire females under 30. Anyway, it's just too much of a risk. By the way, her kid was 15. He probably had indecent thoughts about water kettles too. As I understand it, a boy that age can be turned on by a strong enough gust of wind. There was a mom who insisted that I was being biased towards her kid. She brought up a recent essay as an example and complained about the grade her kid received on it. I had given the essay a C and the mom was saying that it was obviously an A essay. I assured her that I was not biased and pointed out numerous issues with the essay that prevented it from scoring higher. It had content-related issues as well as numerous basic grammatical errors. The mom then revealed that she had written the essay, not her kid. She said, "So it looks like you've got some explaining to do," and then sat back with a smug grin on her face. Yeah, it's me who's got the explaining to do. I've told this story before, but we had a mom who threatened to do to our principal what you see on CSI, automatic restraining order. Wasn't at a parent-teacher conference, but I tutored the child of a very aggressive parent who was so sure that their child was going to get into the #1 high school in the state and would not let anyone tell them otherwise. The mother confronted me because I was taking about 2 lessons to go through past papers. That was because he was getting everything wrong, so I needed to explain almost every question. His ability level wasn't nearly close, and the poor child was under so much pressure from his overbearing parents. I never heard from them again. It's amazing how many parents think they can teach teachers how to teach. My dad has this tendency to complain that my teachers were crap and he was gonna go complain to them personally. My teachers were fine. I just have dyslexia and my parents never gave a crap enough to get me diagnosed during high school. A good thing he never gave a crap enough to remember my teachers' names. The one who told me the reason I was a bad teacher was because I wasn't a mom. No fertility issues, but what if, but had just gone through a terrible breakup of a relationship heading toward marriage and family. Not really what a 35-year-old woman wants to hear from the mother of an emotionally disturbed child. More like an emotionally disturbed mother. Not me, but wife is a kindergarten teacher and suspected that one of her students may be autistic. The kid couldn't communicate well at all, had issues with using the bathroom, and showed other classic signs of autism. My wife had a conference with the mother and explained that she would like him to be evaluated, but the mother refused and said that if her son did have autism, my wife was the one who caused it. Oh man. I was working at a boarding school on their summer school course. We had 2 boys, 8 and 11, arrive with their uncle who they were staying with. The boys were from the UAE. He'd come to drop them off for 5 weeks but neglected to tell the children. They thought they'd come for a nice castle tour. Uncle books it and leaves it to us to explain that they were staying for 5 weeks. Rather than having an awesome holiday, they'd been doing some really cool things for the week prior to being dropped off. During the kids' stay, the uncle would take the boys off campus to go to the mosque and bring them back on Saturday afternoon. One week they came back with games consoles which they weren't allowed. Uncle tried to bribe me to let them keep them by offering me a white chihuahua puppy, and when I declined he shouted at me for being common and poor. During the boys' last week, several trunks full of clothes and belongings arrived because, surprise, the kids were going to be staying at the school until they were 18. Best parents ever. One of the parents in my daughter's class had their conference right before mine. I was sitting in the hall and could hear them trying to rebut everything the teacher said. Then these suckers brought in the mom's sister, who is a teacher, and she got in on it with her expert opinion. Their kid was a butthole, by the way. He stabbed my kid with the scissors and was known as the class bully. Not one kid in particular, but every year there are one or two aggressive or disrespectful students. 90% of the time, the parents try to make excuses about how this is normal, how all kids are like this at that age, and how I should show them more compassion instead of owning up that there is a discipline problem. Those same 90% of parents are also usually disrespectful and verbally aggressive to teachers, and everyone dreads talking to them. That saying about the apple not falling far from the tree rings oh so true. Alternatively, the parents who are the most apologetic and a delight to talk to are the ones with fantastic children. "Sorry if my kid was not focused," is a line I get too often. Are you kidding, mom? I would adopt this child if I could. I had a preschool aged student who would fixate on his female classmates. He would single one out and follow her around, then hug her and try to give her kisses. These were 3-4-year-olds, and they would hate that. So inevitably the girl would try to squirm away, and he'd get angry and start hitting and scratching her face. He'd get in trouble, of course, but the following week he'd have a new target. His mom was horrified and would try to keep him corralled, but he really didn't respect her at all. The only people he'd actually listen to were the dads that attended the program with their kids. They were pretty sympathetic, since they could see the kid had issues and knew we were trying to get him into our agency's free counseling program. Well, his attitude toward females became obvious once his dad came back from deployment. When my supervisor and I met with him, he was proud of what his boy was doing. He said it showed that he knew what he wanted and his determination to get it, and he's not taking any crap from the girls. Really ugly stuff. He literally said that the girls should just let him give them a kiss, since he'd get mad if he couldn't. The mom just kept her head down. Right then I understood why she wanted counseling from us, rather than using his military benefits. He was by far the most misogynistic jerk I have ever met, and his son was picking it up from him. Not a week later, the kid tried to go after the daughter of another Marine. Said Marine was present. Said Marine shouted at the dad for a while and said he'd be speaking to his company. I ended up leaving the program a few days later, but I've always hoped the mom and little boy got away from him and that the boy got some therapy. Otherwise, I have no doubt I'll be seeing him on the news in a few years. That is terrifying. I had a parent come in a week before school ended and tell me their child had the worst year ever and demanded to know what I was going to do to change it. Well, we could repeat it if you think that'd help. I was teaching calculus for seniors in high school. It was for AP credit, and the kids that were in there were a year or two ahead of the average student. A mother came in and told me her daughter was wasting her time in my class because she wasn't smart enough to go to college and would end up just running the family bookstore anyway and not doing anything with her life. The girl was smart, self-motivated, and was already doing college level work and getting A's. I pulled her aside the next day and told her how to look into scholarships if her parents weren't planning on helping pay for college. I'm proud to say she went. You're an amazing teacher. That's great she got to go on to college without her crappy parents bringing her down. I teach K-12 music at a smaller rural school. Musicals are always hard with a small student body and rehearsals conflicting with sports. Students sign a contract in December with one condition, that they attend the last 3 rehearsals before the show in its entirety. Even coaches agreed with us 3 missed practices is fine. 8th grade girl gets asked to try out for varsity softball and tells us that week that she is not coming at the last 3 rehearsals but will be in the show. We say sorry, that is not acceptable. This student we had worked with and accommodated for 3 months, making she got to go to all her basketball practices and could full participate in both, so yeah, we were not very happy she was saying this. We work out with the student that she will come for 95% of the time, only missing the last scene which she was just a body on set with no lines, and then she can still make most of her practices. But we will not allow her in scenes she misses, and the student agreed and said it was no big deal. All seemed fine. Cue angry mother. Demanded a phone call that day. It was 3 PM when we got her email. First sentence was, well, she didn't know when she signed she would be asked to try out, so she shouldn't be held to her contract, which obviously we said is not how contracts work. Then she turned to rage mode, started screaming insults at us, trashing my profession, made numerous comments on how no one gives a crap about music, so why don't we just frick off. Accused us of things that were not true, from threatening students to showing favoritism to giving ultimatums, and then she gave us an ultimatum saying either we let her miss and be in every scene or she is pulling her out. Finally my co-worker got a word in and cut the conversation off, saying an admin will contact her tomorrow. This was 6 PM after rehearsal. The coach talked down the mom, saying it was fine that she go to us first and she will still get to be on varsity, but I never want to see that parent again. After our very successful show she was all over Facebook saying how wonderful it was and how lucky the kids are to get to participate. We just shook our heads at her. I hate how sports are always more important than music. Always. Look, if you want to do one and not the other, great. But don't try to do both and expect music to just take a backseat but you still want to be the star. I had a student, 11th grade, throw scissors at me because he heard someone call me mean. His mom tried to tell me that he gets really upset when men disrespect women. Meanwhile, he told me he could have really done damage if he wanted to. The sad thing, I had only asked him to complete his journal entry for the day. The scissors were then locked up every day. It still blows my mind, and I actually laugh to this day about the incident. A guy came to school livid about his kid's performance. He shouted, insulted, and blamed everyone except his kid himself. The twist is, his kid doesn't go to this school. He actually did not know what school his kid went to. No, he is not divorced. Yes, he lives with his family in the same household. No, he didn't get the school name location wrong. He actually thought his kid went to this school. In our area we see a lot of parents who don't give a crap. But this guy was something else. Sorry for the bad formatting. Posting from phone. I'm white, and I teach at a predominantly black and Hispanic school in a lower income area. I had a black student who would basically sprawl on his desk every day and refuse to do work. Mum was shopping for excuses to get him special treatment because he was an athlete, and if there were things in his plan before he got to high school it would make high school easier. So mom accused me of being racist toward black people and setting unreasonable standards. I reached across my desk and showed her my wedding picture and my wife, who is black. Mom's response, well, she looks pretty light to me. I don't think she's really black. Mom's response, well, she looks pretty light to me. I don't think she's really black. That woman is a special kind of stupid. I teach at an after-school academy in South Korea, so I don't interact with the parents directly, but there are so many kids with behavior problems. Whenever I have the head teacher call parents, I always get the same response. The parent knows about the behavior and they can't control them either. My sister had someone who refused to speak with her because she was cross-dressing due to the fact that she was wearing pants, and that was a sign she wasn't Christian enough. Not a teacher, but my parents were pretty awful to my teachers. Throughout grade school, I noticed that my parents always said disparaging things about teachers I liked and praised teachers I hated. So by junior high, I would flip the roles. If I liked a teacher, I always claimed I hated them. And if I disliked a teacher, I made up crap about how inspirational they were and how I loved them. Have you ever had that point in your life when you were really right about something and you were disappointed instead of overjoyed that you were right? Yep, it wasn't 100% foolproof. There were some teachers that I liked in the beginning of the year that I ended up not liking at the end of the year, and vice versa. Sometimes teachers would come up to me in annoyance and ask why my dad was so mean to them. My dad is a sociopath and considers himself far more intelligent than anyone he is in front of, and he makes them know it. Eventually social services got involved, and that changed everything. Now the teachers had a note in my file that things at home were not good, which pretty much disconnected my parents from being taken seriously. After that happened, I had a lot of teachers that were very valuable allies in getting through my life. Some taught me a lot of valuable lessons that I still use to this day. I am extremely grateful for all of the teachers that I met that helped me along. It's nice to hear of bureaucratic systems actually working as they're supposed to. Congrats to you for picking up what they were laying down. Second grader, really bright, funny, and interesting kid. Also very wiggly and a little overconfident. He had a really hard time taking constructive feedback on anything. He would get super offended and sometimes really upset if I gave him a suggestion to add to his writing, etc. He also didn't really follow directions and had to be the center of attention a lot of the time, which was distracting with 26 other kids in the class. Because he couldn't take suggestions, he wasn't making as much progress as he should have been. Mum came to the conference and talked for 15+ minutes about how her son's a genius and she tells him that every day, etc, etc. This is textbook fixed mindset stuff and explained perfectly why he can't handle feedback at all. It was fascinating but really frustrating, because she's so clearly holding him back but she doesn't respect teachers much, so there's no way for someone to tell her that. Also, her kid isn't a genius. Like, I have had a handful of those, and he is just not one of them, but he is still awesome, and important, and special and wonderful. It was just weird to see how much he insisted that he must be the smartest kid in the room. I feel like calling kids geniuses is bad for them. You can have all the natural intelligence in the world, but if you don't understand the value of hard work, you still won't go anywhere in life. My district is actually about 90% full of decent parents. Parents who want their kids to do well, but correctly. Like parents who, if the kid is failing, ask what the kid can do to bring their own grade up. Make up missing homework, extra credit. They want to know how they can help. The worst I get, usually, is wishy-washy parents, and my student must go to Ivy League parents. When I call a wishy-washy parent and say, yeah, it's a third of the way through the quarter and your kid hasn't done any homework. Here's my website where the kid can download all the missing homeworks and turn them in for partial credit. The parent says, well, I'll try to get him to do that. At that point, I wash my hands of this homework being done. I've done my job, covered my butt with regards to contacting the parent. I'll contact them again towards the end of the quarter saying, yeah, kid's gonna fail if the homework isn't done, and wash my hands again. I had one mom ask about grades. Her honors student was pulling a 96 in my class. Excellent. She asked what he should be doing to get a higher grade. I'm literally dumbfounded at this point. I have to tell her, nothing, really. This is English, not math. Things are rarely 100% correct and there is always room for improvement in writing. I tell her to have him work on cutting the fat out of his writing and I'd help him if he wanted. But a 96 is excellent in my class, especially in honors where I'm a tough grader. Yeah, my student must go to Ivy League parents, and similarly, in high school, those kinds of students are prats. I have had to deal with physically aggressive parents on more than one occasion. The worst was a dad who almost out of control because we had confiscated a knife and called him in about it. I teach at a small high school in a village in England. I am rather tall, 6'5". A couple of parents went to the principal to complain that I am unapproachable and intimidating despite the fact that I smile constantly and am very friendly. Ended with a meeting with myself, the parents and the assistant principal to talk about how I could be less intimidating and more welcoming to parents. I didn't return to that school the next year. The answer is obvious. Cut your legs off at the knee. Had a senior in drafting class. Didn't work. Refused to stay awake through class. No effort whatsoever. Needed the class to graduate. First 9 weeks progress reports are sent home, and I magnanimous gave him a 68 so that he would have a chance to pass for the semester. Cue his screeching hag of a mother spending an hour verbally abusing me. Documentation? Check. Copies of correspondence? Check. Didn't matter. It was my fault he wasn't allowed to take his driving test due to failing a class. That she had spent a lot of money on his car and now he wouldn't get the chance to drive it. This went on with the guidance counselor's blessing until I finally had enough. I explained my reasoning for his grade and giving him a chance to get turned around and be able to pass for the semester. I apologized for giving him a 68 and asked if she would rather have what he earned put on his report card. She replied yes. So I looked to the guidance counselor and told him I wished to change the grade to a 28 and showed my grade book to prove that he had indeed earned that grade. She immediately started backpedaling and accusing me of picking on her son. I stood up, looked at her, and said, you have a choice. The 28 he earned, or the 68 I gave him. Have him let me know tomorrow. I am late for class. I walked out of the meeting. They chose the 68. He was a model student after that. That must have felt sweet. There are a lot of examples of parents that don't make their kids take responsibility for their own actions. But my worst experience is from a family member. I teach grade 1 and by the time kids come to me, they are often established in their reading help club, speech therapy, occupational therapy, counseling, etc. But it is still my job to make sure that if a kid needs help that they get it. I was visiting my aunt and spending a lot of time with my young cousin. She has a very obvious speech impediment that needs a lot of attention. I asked my aunt how's she doing in speech therapy and was met with silence and anger. Apparently, she refused to acknowledge that her daughter had an issue. I asked if she had ever talked to her teacher about it and my aunt replied her teacher doesn't know what she's talking about. So, my cousin will go on without being able to say her sister's name properly and will have considerable difficulty with spelling and reading because she can't actually pronounce the sounds properly. My mother, a teacher, had this parent whose kid was about 13 years old and has severe and treated ADHD. The mother explained that she just had too many things going on in her life to worry about her own son and that he needed to learn there were consequences for his actions. This kid has a medical disease and she's literally ignoring him because she had better things to do. The parent that expects the school to raise their child. Not her fault. She has better things to do. My first year of teaching. First parent-teacher conference. First night ever meeting students' parents and I almost got into a fist fight to defend myself. I had taken a temporary pay teaching contract in a teeny tiny town in Saskatchewan a day before the school year started. Unbeknownst to me, the guy I was covering for only had 2 lessons in his lesson plan: dodgeball and floor hockey. Come PTI night, an upset parent showed up to the interviews angry that their son had an 8% in pay. I'd asked my principal to join me during this interview and he pulled up a chair beside the angry dad. For the next 90 minutes, I calmly and politely tried to explain the reasoning behind my unit plans, backed up my grading and my lesson planning with curricular objectives and ministry initiatives. I crossed every I and dotted every T while they, literally, were yelling and screaming at me across the table. It culminated with a 250+ pound father standing over my table with my face less than 2 feet from mine and waving his finger less than 2 inches away from my nose while yelling that I was an arrogant prick that needed to be taught a lesson in humility from someone older and wiser. My administrator did nothing. I've bartended, bounced, and I train in martial arts. That was the most like a potential self-defense situation that I've ever been in. I got an adrenaline dump after the interaction worse than my first boxing fight. That's how close to a fist fight I thought this situation got to. Can you explain how the kid failed pay? All the pay classes I've taken would just show up for a B and be dressed for an A. My wife is a 2nd and 3rd grade teacher. She had her purse stolen by one of her kids' parents. She left the conference midway through the meeting to grab some printouts, test scores, for the dad. When she returned he was gone. She didn't realize until about 30 minutes past that her purse was gone. Also, I teach 7/8 choir, but was asked to sub for 1 hour of 6th phys ed. They were crazy, but whatever. Until at the end, one kid messes up a VB hit, and a girl yells across the gym that he's a homo. I pull her aside and tell her that's not okay. She claims she didn't say anything. I write her up. She scribbles it out and starts fighting with me. I bring her to the office and try to forget about it, even though I'm fuming mad. Well, her mother, who is the secretary for another school in our district, calls me later and chews me out, saying her daughter said hobo instead of homo. Insert eye roll. Okay, sure. She still shouldn't have yelled anything at another student. Yes, I'm sure she said homo. Yes, it was loud. No, I didn't escalate the situation. Your daughter did, etc. Left the phone call nearly in tears as my next class is walking in. Turns out she also called me principal to tell her I sounded young and inexperienced. 26. 4th year teacher, and that she stands by her daughter saying hobo. The principal also rolled her eyes, but it's just frustrating. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now. Teachers of Reddit, what is your "this student is so smart it's scary" story? One of my kindergartners just knows multiplication, and not just the basic 5s or 10s. In the beginning when his parents told me, I played along with 2 by 2 or 10x10, but you can tell him 17x14 and he knows it instantly. So cool to watch. I had a student ask for an extension on their paper because they were representing our nation in the World Science Festival. They came in 3rd, and the paper was an A+. Now I don't have an excuse to keep putting off my research revisions. I was doing a 500-piece puzzle with some kids. I was a preschool teacher. We finished the puzzle, except for one piece, which was nowhere to be found. Kid comes in, takes one look at the puzzle on the table, says, "Oh, are you missing that? I know where it is." Reaches into another completely different 500-piece puzzle, rummages for like 10 seconds, pulls the piece out, fits it in. I ask him how he knew it was there. He said he had done the other puzzle for a bit and noticed it. I asked him how long ago. "Christmas," he says. It was February at the time. Kid was maybe 5 at the time. Might be more memory than intelligence, but that was crazy to see. Such a great kid, in somewhat dire circumstance. I hope he's gotten all the opportunities he deserved. 5-year-old memory is the best memory. I'm at the point where if I forget something in class, where I put my keys, what page we were on yesterday, what color James colored his duck, I just ask them. They always know. I once had a pre-kindergartner who could read, and cried because he was so upset with how dumb the rest of the kids were. My mom would write little notes for preschool me and stick them in my lunchbox. My teacher noticed I could read them and would have me read them to the class every day after that. I cried, but from embarrassment, lol. I work with 18-24-month-olds and we have an 18-month-old who can have little conversations, perfect sentence structures, perfect verb conjugation, perfect pronunciation, even L and R, knows all the alphabets, numbers, colors, shapes, by sight. Some of the others know some of those things, but I've never seen a baby this advanced. I sometimes forget she's only 1 year old because she seems more like 3.5, just tiny like a 1-year-old. Her dad brought her back from a well baby checkup telling us that the doctor asked, "Does she say any words yet?" and we all lolled cause she has full conversations. My son spoke in full sentences by 18 months, reading by 2.5, could add, subtract and multiply etc. before preschool. He's now 21, unemployed and spends all day playing games online, still smart as though, just lazy. Had a first grader figure out exponents on his own. That's just the way he was raised. We had a 4-year-old in preschool. He was sitting under the table writing down numbers for a long time. He had no time to talk to us. When he came out and we looked at what he had been doing, he said he wrote down all the multiplications. It turns out his brother in 5th grade was learning the multiplication table, and this little brother really wanted to do the same, but did not have a multiplication table. He counted on his fingers to add each column, and got the table right. A few days later he knew multiplication. He would also comment on dates. If someone told they had their birthday on the 12th of June, he would say that is in 184 days almost immediately. On an excursion we passed some statues with birth and death dates, and he would casually sum up. He was 78 years and 110 days old. She was born 33 years and 120 days before him, etc. I think he was maybe more focused and willing to understand than necessarily so smart. If he was right about the days, that's definitely very smart for a 4-year-old. I'm 26 and can't even do that. I taught high school math. One of my freshman students divided 1134 by 63 in his head in less than a second. I let him finish the problem, and then after he arrived at his answer, I asked him, how did you do that? He looked at me with this blank stare as if he was thinking, you can't do that. He proceeded to say, well, I doubled 63 and then multiplied that by 10, and then I saw that 1134 was just the difference of those two numbers. So 18 looked at me like it was nothing. I told him good work and moved on. I'm only above average at a few things, but one of them is mental math. When I saw that this kid could do this calculation that I couldn't, I was so happy. It was one of my happiest moments as a teacher. I didn't help him in that moment, but to know I played a small part in his math education felt so good. Well, I doubled 63 and then multiplied that by 10, and then I saw that 1134 was just the difference of those two numbers. So 18. I feel so stupid because I can't even wrap my head around the explanation. Not a teacher but a proud big brother. My baby sister was 5 when I came home from college for the summer after actually figuring out calculus, and I explained it to her, and she wrote it down in her journal. Yes, she kept one from the time she was about 4. Fast forward after she skipped a few grades in elementary school and she was taking calculus in high school, and could not understand why it was so easy, and reread her journal, figured it out, and called me, laughing. She has a PhD in high energy physics and does research at CERN. Yeah, that stuff. Desperately proud of her. You did her one of the best kindnesses you could have made happen. Early stimulation of the brain really can have a kid go places later. Not a teacher, but a kid in my grade ended up taking courses 2 years ahead of the rest of us advanced kids. The funny part was that he skipped his own mother's class and wrote novels during middle school math. He's published 3 books and currently has over 95% in every class. I have a 5-year-old this year who has stolen my wallet more times than I'd like to admit, from my pocket, without me knowing. I now wear a wallet chain like I don't remember what decade it is. He still tries but he hasn't figured out a workaround yet. Nah man, he is even smarter than that. Now that he's trained you to be obsessed with the wallet, and you think that's all he cares about too, he's in the clear to start stealing other things. Check your desk. I'm a piano teacher on the side, teaching a 4-year-old how to read sheet music before she can read books. I ask her to find a season she will point then out on the page act. She can also do math really well and understands the concept of multiplication. Also another student that just started and plays by ear and composes her own pieces at 8. She also speaks 5 languages which I didn't find out until I told her I was learning German. After teaching her for 3 months she's already to the point where I had to send her to a better teacher. Kudos to you for recognizing that she needs a better teacher. Not many teachers do. Have an upvote. Obligatory not a teacher comment. There was once a kid in the grade above me in middle school that hacked the school database and deleted everyone's grades. He was expelled. When I was in 6th grade a kid took down the school internet using a school administered laptop. Kid took the fat highlighters, cut them open and removed the insides and replaced it with weed. Sold them at school. He was caught, but only because a kid snitched after they were caught getting high. Absolutely brilliant. Highlighters. It's right there in the name. My mom was a student teacher in the early 1970s. She recounts the story of a gifted first grader that nobody really knew how to handle. Every day her mentor would give the child a copy of the New York Times and let him read during her class. Much later my mom was working as a speech therapist and had a severely autistic child that would come in daily. After their lessons he would spend his free time drawing elaborate and accurate city maps on the whiteboard. It was fascinating. Worked at a special purpose preschool designed for kids on the autism spectrum. Did an intake day with a kiddo, 4YO, where I was just trying to have fun and see what kind of things he liked. Did some time on the computer where we surfed around YouTube a bit. He searched up a video about our solar system and began to explain to me the difference between the inner solar system and the outer solar system, what they're made of, sizes, electromagnetic fields to compensate for distance from the sun, etc. I had to Google everything he was saying, because I had no idea if it was true. Spoiler alert, it was. My 7-year-old son is on the autism spectrum and this is him with weather and sports. I stopped questioning him because he was right and I wasn't. For Christmas we bought him a bunch of books on weather and climate. By New Year's he had memorized them all, yet we can't get him to sew his math homework. A student at my school had OCD, so just memorized the textbook and wrote out the correct chapter for each question. Also their handwriting was so neat that it looked like it had been typed out with a typewriter. I have mild OCD and all it helps me do is constantly reminding me that I forgot to lock the front door, even though I remembered. Not a teacher, but had a classmate who was, and still is, a genius. I distinctly remember him asking very complex questions on the current reading literature and making constructive arguments. It was over my head, but our teacher was offended and argued back that he didn't understand anything and or an overachiever. I think they were over her head as well. She screamed at him and stormed out of class a number of times. There was a time she asked him to leave as well. I never felt so bad for a classmate. He didn't deserve to be yelled at like that. I believe he's now a mathematician with published works and awards as well as a successful musician. My mother told me a story once of a kid she went to high school with. This kid was the local stoner but incredibly smart. He was talking college courses way before everyone else, saying they ran out of math for me dog. I have a student who is an immigrant that speaks fluent English. I assume that she grew up in the USA. She told me she had been here for a year and knew zero English before coming. I was amazed. I have another student who just does calculations instantly in his head. He doesn't have to think. When he learns more math it just becomes automatic. He explained that numbers just make sense. The English thing is surprisingly easy as long as you take the right approach. I came to the US in the same situation as a 12-year-old. I just kept rewatching movies and series I had seen in my original language and was fluent 2 years later. I'm not a teacher, I'm a student, but one of my classmates just has so much random crap memorized. Ask him about anything, like the Crimean War, how to build a combustion engine, random useful bits of information about bands from the 70s, as well as being an excellent student in every single subject. He's also managed to teach himself Cyrillics or whatever that Russian alphabet thing is, and can speak Russian pretty well, despite never having taken a class of it in his life. IDK. It's just nuts he's so good at so many random things. Yeah, Cyrillics is Russian alphabet, though it originated in Bulgaria and it's used in a few more countries, like Ukraine or Serbia. So, as I have found the hard way out, don't call it the Russian alphabet. Oh, and by the way, it's not really hard to memorize. I bet that if you wanted to get familiar with it, it would take you 1-2 hours. I had a kid who could take one look at a national flag and then point to the corresponding country on an unlabeled world map instantly. Nah, I think that kid spent too many hours playing grand strategy games. I teach kids with autism that learn on the alternate curriculum, usually lower level academics, and have cognitive delays. I'm always amazed that while they might struggle in one area, the strengths they have. I had one girl who knew everyone's birthday, everyone she met, day, month, year and age. She could also do crazy math in her head. I have another kid who is minimally verbal but knows every locker combination in the school. 2 others who are amazing artists. Another who could tell you what 80s movie icon shared a birthday with you. I love my kids. That has to be a wonderful roller coaster of interesting moments, both pro and con. A kid's work kept deleting itself on a computer every few minutes. He was having a meltdown and I saw it happen. It was impossible to explain the phantom deleting that was going on. Fast forward to the end of the class and there's one kid remaining. That was sitting at the opposite computer from the kid who lost all his work. He looks at me and says, "You wanna know how I did, sir?" He had put in a USB keyboard into the back of the computer and had it set up so he could hit the delete key with his big toe. It was the funniest stealth attack I'd seen in a long time. Being the teacher, I should have done something, but it was too funny and smart. That's hilarious and scary at the same time. Former school aide here. I once had a very tiny lad surprise me. For typical development would be learning basic alphabet recognition and first sounds towards word forming. However, He took some play clay and made a and pan plan plane planets across the table and wandered off again. My friend took the ACT when we were in 7th grade and got a 31. I don't know how because they don't teach you half of that material until high school. Heck of a guy though, would intentionally get questions wrong on really difficult tests so he wouldn't kill the curve for the rest of us. Wish the smart dudes in my classes were like that. Not a teacher, but had a classmate in my American government class in a community college about 9-10 years ago. Our teacher gives 3 questions for you to pick one of them to write about for the test in essay format. You get the question about a week or so to prepare you to study your subject's question. Most people write an average of 5-8 pages during the test. This guy writes around 20 pages, give or take. Even the teacher was dumbfounded. He did this for every test and this is a 3-term class. You don't have to take all terms, or even take it order if you happen to do all 3. Yes, he got A's. He wanted to get into politics. I heard of overachievers, but WTF, who does that? Since I'm not a teacher either, my mom was a very average student, didn't try very hard, and was not planning to go to college. Back when she was in school, they used to administer IQ tests. A couple of months after she takes an IQ test, the school calls my grandparents and says we need to talk about your daughter. Everyone is like, oh lord, what did she do now? They both go to the school and the principal sits them down. Your daughter has an IQ of 140, but she's failing algebra. We think you should send her to a psychiatrist. My grandfather was livid. He took off work for this. No, she never saw a psychiatrist. And she didn't go to college. But she's pretty smart. IQ doesn't exactly measure how smart you are but your capacity to learn. I had a first grader with a speech impediment who was asking for a type of book. His peers and I couldn't understand him no matter how hard we tried. Finally, he gave up and without any frustration, he found a picture book with someone stirring a pot on the cover. He opened the book and skimmed through words until he found what he was looking for, the word cooking. He showed me the book and pointed, telling me that was the word he had been trying to say. He wanted a cookbook. This was a 6-year-old. 6. Dang. Kids can be freaky when they memorize specific stuff, but that kind of thinking is incredibly intelligent. My mom had a special needs student who went on some field trip to one of the NASA centers. I don't remember where. His dad was an IT guy I think, and had been teaching this kid, around 10 years old I think, stuff on the side because he was all about computers. Kid wandered off and apparently found some office or computer lab or something unlocked, walked in, sat down at a computer, figured out how to unlock that terminal, and started browsing through their internal stuff for a while before someone caught him. He got in big trouble for that one, but I don't know if it even registered in his mind what a huge issue that code'll be. He would do it at school and nobody cared too much, so I don't think he saw an issue doing it out in the real world. He came to my mom the next year or the year after that when his family moved, and my mom was warned not to leave her personal electronics unattended because he would figure out how to get in. My mom had a second grader who skipped the knowledge dump stage and listened better than a grown butt man. For example, when other boys would tell you all their dinosaur facts, he would ask her, I am curious Ms. Latitude, what do you think caused the extinction of the dinosaurs? His emotional intelligence was through the roof. I just remembered that I had to see the school therapist for a while because one day during 4th grade show and tell the teacher asked me what I was doing for my birthday, and I said I was going to my grandfather's funeral, but it was okay because he had been in pain for a long time, and now he wasn't. I had a student maybe 5-6 years ago. I teach social studies, dude didn't come in direct contact with her areas, she was truly special. But anyway, she could speak 5 languages pretty fluently. English is her native. She learned French in middle school, taught herself Russian and Italian for the sake of reading, and learned Indonesian from being around kids in the school and wanting to pick it up. She could write music just from hearing it, then reproduce it with essentially no time. I don't know if this is common or not, but it absolutely shocked me. She's, bar none, the best student I've seen as a teacher with regards to conveying herself through written work. She graduated just a few weeks after turning 16. One of those kids who effortlessly glides to top of her class. Last I heard, She was about to graduate in something related to archaeology. I was a student teacher at the time completing my education degree. I taught 8th grade. There was this one girl who was your typical edgy, angsty 13-year-old who was too cool for everything. When we went through our poetry unit, we gave a project in which the kids had to write their own free-form poem and put it to some sort of video or slideshow. This girl wrote a poem about how the United States education system as it is stifles creativity and destroys students' joy of learning. I always remember this one line from her poem. I learned more from an evening watching Hamilton on stage than an entire year in a United States history class. The video was your typical angsty black and white shots of her friends standing solemnly in front of or behind chain link fences and signs that say no trespassing. The next day she showed up with a gigantic biography of Alexander Hamilton. It was bigger than most Bibles. It only took her a week to read it. My mentor teacher hated her because she thought the student thought she was smarter than everyone else and was arrogant. Maybe she did think that. Maybe she thought we were annoying simpletons. But I just thought she was dope as frick. This kid didn't particularly like or dislike me, hated my mentor teacher, and disliked anyone except a couple friends. She was sassy. She was smart. She had a finely tuned balls meter. She had a huge vocabulary and an obvious love of learning. She'd grill out book after book, and where my mentor teacher saw arrogance in her poem project, I just saw a girl who was desperately bored and was asking for a challenge. I tried my best to give her extra, more challenging options in the future for her assignments. She never said anything to me, but I got the feeling she appreciated it, or I hope she did. That biography would be Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. It is big and it is wonderful. My son has a fascination with nuclear physics and science. He's collected commonly found radioactive minerals that I made him get rid of so the whole house doesn't get cancer. He's researching a way to build a miniature thorium reactor and insists the only reason it doesn't exist now is because people have given up on it. He's 15. My oldest daughter is an incredible artist, but she's got that attitude like her poop doesn't smell bad. She's always made incredible drawings with simple pencils and paper since she was a child. She could capture your likeness in her mind with a glance and draw you out with a piece of standard white typing paper and an office number 2. She's now 18. My youngest daughter watches death metal goats on YouTube. She's about to turn 14. The death metal one is the real genius, living the dream. My twin brother, who we just recently found out that he is on the spectrum for Asperger's. When we were 3 he would read the old-fashioned maps to my mother and tell her where to go. Fast forward to 8 years old, he would read at college level. Now we're 16. He's still very smart, but very auto-tune. My mother calls it this due to the fact that he always had different levels of sensitivity attuned to certain things. But when I was 3, I was just learning how to eat on my own, due to medical problems that I still have to this day. I'm not sure what auto-tune means. I coach Science Olympiad, which naturally draws some very smart students. I was on a long bus ride with them to nationals and sat next to one of our 7th graders. This kid had to be one of the smartest kids I've ever met. He's brilliant. We ended up playing 20 questions and I decided to be a jerk and do something really hard and specific, settling on whiptail lizard. First question, is it a vertebrate? I said yes. Second question, does it reproduce parthenogenically? Yes. Third question, it's a whiptail lizard. Kid got my obscure animal in 3 guesses. He just graduated high school last year. I believe he's going to an Ivy. My 2-year-old son is obsessed with letters. He is already a prolific speller. He seems to memorize words he sees and spells from memory. One morning he comes into my bedroom while I'm half asleep. I roll over and see that he has brought in his puzzle letters. After waking up properly, I see that he's spelled out symphony. He's gonna be annihilating his friends at spelling bees later on. Not a teacher and kinda stupid, but I was a musical prodigy when I was in elementary school. I could play around 6 different instruments before middle school. Piano being the main and first one I learned at 4, then the flute, clarinet, percussion, trumpet, and finally guitar when my hands got big enough. In middle school band, if another student couldn't play a solo, I would just do it on whatever instrument it called for. I gave it all up in high school and college for sports because I got really bored. Also, side note, kids like this, including myself, grow up to have severe anxiety and depression. I developed social anxiety disorder and still in therapy for it today. I always felt like I couldn't fit in or relate to kid my age at the time and had the overwhelming feeling of never being good enough at anything. Not a teacher, but my friend. She was that kid who would always get in trouble during class for reading, and she always had a stack of at least 3 books on her. The other day I was labeling a map of Africa for shoots and giggles to see if I could get it, and she made me feel like a dumbass by correcting my mistakes. She didn't have a map in front of her or anything. She just knew African geography for some reason. It isn't specific to Africa either. You can show her a flag of a country and she'll tell you what country it is and the previous versions of that flag. It scares the heck out of me. I always thought I was a passable geography nerd. What is your most traumatic experience with a teacher? My 4th grade teacher had a reputation for making one boy in her class an unpopular scapegoat each year. Lucky me, in previous years I'd been just another kid in the playground, but within 2 months the other kids wouldn't play with me during recess. One day I refused to go outside for recess. She asked why, and I foolishly told her that the other kids didn't like me. When they came back in, she marched me to the front of the class and asked for a show of hands. Who didn't like me? 4th grade kids, mostly, did what 4th grade kids do. I broke down that night and told my mom what had happened and what had been going on all along. She marched into school the next day, got a beating that included the principal, and tore the teacher a new butthole. I was still stuck in that class, but the teacher moved on to a new victim. Funny thing how self-esteem influences academic performance. My school used to give us a Stanford Binet IQ test every year. My score dropped 10 points from 3rd to 4th grade, then rose 20 points in 5th grade when I had a nurturing teacher. If you are still alive, frick you, Mrs. Erickson. For an Erickson, she should really try to understand Erickson's theory of development. That would have reminded her that accomplishing things and receiving praise helps students grow. I was bullied really bad. Kids kept drawing awful ugly photos and leaving them on my desk with profanity towards my appearance. I had enough one day after dealing with a lot of abuse at home and the bullying at school, and when I saw another broke down crying and brought it to my teacher. She just grabbed it, looked and asked if I wanted it back. Did nothing to help. Wouldn't listen to me about the constant bullying and did absolutely nothing. I was in 7th grade and still remember it to this day. I'm so sorry. Frick that teacher and frick those bullies. Mine is more of a light-hearted traumatic. In 4th grade I collected Yu-Gi-Oh cards and I had gotten the, at the time, new 3 Egyptian god cards. Well, I was caught playing with them during class and my teacher took them from me and threw them out. I was devastated after all the packs opened and cards traded to acquire them. I never forgave her. Did they ever end up being worth anything before all the reprint boxes? I would have loved to see her face if she found out they were worth some coin. This is like when Weevil threw Yuji's Exodia cards into the ocean. Teacher told me I was a liar to the whole class as she didn't believe my grandmother was a World War I evacuee. She refused to believe me as she assumed my mum was younger than she looked at the time, and therefore my grandmother was younger as well. She thought my mum was in her late 20s when in reality she was in her early 40s at the time. Didn't traumatize me personally, but I had a first year lecturer in classics who went out of his way to terrorize the class. His first words to us were, "I suspect as many as half of you cannot read." He then administered a test, which 2/3 of the class failed. He was not shy about voicing his rather gleeful displeasure. I did well enough to avoid his wrath, and, annoyingly, get singled out for praise. He would routinely throw questions at students who weren't paying rigorous attention in a 3-hour lecture on Friday morning, and then berate them for not knowing the answers. His comments on papers were beyond stringent. "Are you illiterate? Do you imagine this makes sense? This is childish," etc. The unfortunate part is that he was a superb classicist. A close second was a novelist turned writing prof who hurled a girl's manuscript out of his office door, nearly hitting me in the hall as he shouted, "This is not Writing. She came out to pick up her magnus opus moments later, weeping. Great writer. Self-confessed crap teacher. My favorite teacher in middle school was arrested for child pornography. He wasn't my favorite after that. He also wasn't my teacher after that. During quiet reading time, teacher brought me to front of the class because I was reading a book for girls, and he asked me, why are you reading a girls book? Are you a girl? Then made me choose a book for boys to read. I was maybe 10 or 11. The book was Matilda, by the way. Fitting. Got accused of plagiarism over a paper I wrote, and didn't plagiarize. That I was really excited about because of how well I thought I did on it. Enthusiasm fully destroyed. I said that the dot over the I or J is called a tittle. She said it's not a tittle, it's a dot. And with that, she accused me of being impertinent. Technically it was the vice principal, but the day my brother died, apparently he thought it would be a good idea to walk in on story time. The teacher was reading to the class, set me on his lap and tell me in front of everyone that my brother committed suicide. Dude, what a freak. I'm so sorry this happened to you. I got into a shouting match with my band director before a marching band competition in another state. He had anger issues and the fight was over him calling me out in front of everyone for messing up my saxophone solo the week before. There was no one else around to see or hear the shouting. He never said so much as a word to me for the remainder of my time in high school, and I was perfectly fine with it. In 5th grade I would often become sick to my stomach and cry for hours. Later in life found out that these were panic attacks. My teacher spanked me with a bungee cord until I stopped crying. I still resent her and my parents for that. Spanked me with a bungee cord until I stopped crying. Do people have brains or no? Because doing something that will probably make a problem worse doesn't usually solve said problem. One time I was on my period and I asked the teacher to go to the bathroom multiple times. She refused to let me go. Eventually I stained my uniform in the chair. I was so embarrassed that I started crying. When my mother found out, she made the school fire that mother. Good going, Ma. Glad she stood up for you. The girls in our elementary school were given proto-adult ed before the boys. The basic puberty stuff. Your body is starting to change. You might develop breasts, sweating, all that stuff. They made a hoo-hoo-hoo stupid deal about keeping it quiet. It's the girls' little secret. Don't go spreading it around school. It only occurs to me now that that is kinda dangerous in the wider scope of things. Anyway, my best friend was a boy and naturally, I skipped right off to tell him why suddenly half the class had an assembly all by themselves. My teacher heard about it, got me alone, grabbed me by both arms and shook me. Keep your mouth shut. She was my favorite teacher up till then. Totally a great thing to teach a kid. We had the same talk. They gave us holders for pads but told us to tell boys they were pencil holders. So I said that when asked. I was teased for a long time for saying that it was a pencil holder. Used to love math and science, until I had a teacher in a 6th grade who would bully, mock, and do everything in his power to embarrass me in front of the entire class. I lost all love I had for school after that class. Frick you, Mr. Bright. He doesn't live up to his name, sadly. Not exactly me, but had a teacher yell at one of my friends for not doing his homework and give him a Saturday school, even though his parents had died the night before. Frick that teacher. So when I was in kindergarten I didn't make it to the bathroom in time and wet myself. Went to the nurse's office, got new clothes, but instead of panties I had to wear a pull-up. Not a big deal. I guess it was a school policy for kids my age, I don't really know. When I get back to my class my teacher loudly says, "Oh good, the baby is finally back," or something like that. She also knew about the policy and asked if I was wearing a diaper so every other student could hear. I was 5 and felt a ton of shame and humiliated. I started crying and trying to get out of school a lot because of it. My teacher often referred to me as a baby for the rest of the year. Also, she would constantly ask if I needed to potty or if I was wearing a diaper, like I was a toddler or something. The horrifying thing is that you probably didn't have the social or verbal skills to explain this to your parents and understand it's something that could be stopped. What a horrible teacher. When I was in 2nd grade, my mom died. When I was in 3rd grade, the evil witch of a teacher held me back from recess one day for something. While it was just us in the room, she asked if I went to church. I said no. She then told me that I was going to heck and would never see my mom again. I hated that bee. Says stories are filling me with rage towards some teachers. I know just like any profession there are amazing ones and there are bad ones, but abuse of power is a big issue for me. Had a teacher who hated my dad because he used to trespass onto the facility my dad was a manager of back in the day. Sucker was taking it all on me and was pretty open about it. Not so traumatic, but was a very bad experience for many. My science teacher subtracted 3 points of everyone's grades because he had a bad day. Half of my friends didn't make it to the next year. Had a math teacher that would give pop quizzes in an entirely different math field to all the girls in the class anytime he had a fight with his wife. I was in the 4th grade. Found a dry erase marker on the playground. I wrote my initials on the tire swing. Classmate rats me out. I get yelled at for like 20 minutes straight about vandalism of school property. She starts going off about how it's the first step to becoming a criminal. Being a little kid, this scared the crap out of me. It was probably another 2 years before I believed that I wasn't going to become a criminal as an adult. I accidentally played footsie with a teacher. He was my English teacher and also the baseball coach. The baseball and softball teams traveled together sometimes and somehow we wound up sitting at the same table. Though I was nudging someone else and he said something, I turned beet red. Teacher forced me to handwrite a story, then got mad when I couldn't read it to the class. I have learning disabilities and normally used a school laptop, but she wouldn't let me use it. That's illegal now. If we go against an IEP, we have serious repercussions, or at least we're supposed to. Sadly, not every administration does a good job taking care of their spec ed students. I was talking about the flying squirrels at my grandparents' cabin to a friend and the teacher overheard me. He bellowed out, "There's no such thing as flying squirrels, don't lie just to get people to pay attention to you." 6th grade. I was 11. Hadn't been diagnosed with ADD, now ADHD, yet. The only way I could pay attention in class was if I doodled at the margins of my notes and bounced my legs. My history teacher noticed I did this, and if he caught me he'd rip the page out of my notebook, show it to the class, and marvel at what a bad student and unintelligent person I was, to everyone. Screamed at me because I came in smiling and humming BC it was my birthday, said it was disruptive and I cried on the spot, and now I have burning hatred for that teacher. But hey, she got hit by a car. Don't worry, not a scratch though, just bumped. Glad to hear the car is okay. Being consistently targeted by my teacher, it was endless. Just one thing after the next. He took my crap, went through my crap, punished me extra and targeted me for random bulls. End of the year, we went to outdoor ed camp, 3-day coming of age camp for moving into middle school, and there was a poetry workshop thing. Workshops comprised your whole day. This was a Christian school, and being a Christian and feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, I wrote a poem where the synopsis was, despite my difference to others, I am loved and cherished by God and still hold value. He read it later, and sat me down with my father, calling me suicidal and shaming me for being a disgrace to God and the faith, and was one of many teachers that recommended me for medication and suicide watch. He was later, 5 years, arrested for possession of child pornography. Frick you, Justin. If you really want revenge on that butthole, visit him in jail. Tell him exactly what you and every other decent person in the world really thinks of him. Teacher accused me of stealing artwork I imagined and created myself. She failed me for the quarter. Hands down the best teacher I ever had. Got pulled out mid-class to get arrested for multiple child molestation charges. Computer teacher shamed me into withdrawing from the one programming class the school offered after the first day of it because he said he didn't think I was capable of learning how to program and that other kids more capable couldn't take it because I was filling a spot. I early enrolled while still in high school and had a professor who really made me love politics and law. so I decided that's what I wanted to focus my academic career on. I did well in all of my courses and was setting myself up to start my bachelor's with political science pre-law as my major. All was going well until one professor, an older man who hated me from day one. He saw this young blonde chick in his class, which, let's be real, was an easy and basic prereq at a community college, and decided I wasn't worth his time. He would constantly answer any of my questions condescendingly, and in an effort make me feel dumb, he would call on me to answer questions on material he hadn't taught yet. Finally, at the end of the semester, he handed back my final paper and decided to have a talk with me after the rest of the class left. He told me that maybe politics law wasn't the thing for me, and that maybe I should look into doing something different. Joke's on him though, I ended up completing my major and working as main staff on a major campaign during 2012. Then after all that fun, I decided I didn't want to go to law school and I now work for the govt. So still, frick that dude. I did get put in the sorg pit for misbehaviors. Perhaps sorged is not the English word. It was the worst time for my life. Singapore school system was horrible. I had a teacher bring a knife to school and threatened me with it as a joke. He didn't get any reprimand to my knowledge and I hated going to class for the rest of the year. I wasn't removed from the class since it was the only advanced Spanish class. If they hadn't been witnesses, I would have thought I'd dreamed it. I had a teacher in 8th grade who obviously didn't like me. She was awful. I was kind of having a hard time fitting in and getting emotionally bullied. Then my parents got a divorce, and I admit I was off at times and it probably showed that I took it out on other students. So before class started, I was goofing off with other children and she turned at me and said, "You realize nobody likes you, right?" I was taken back and just kind of reinforced what I already knew, that I didn't and probably would never fit in. What the frick? My senior year of high school, my mental health took a steep dive. I was dealing with a lot of instability at home. One of my closest friends had become a relentless antagonistic bully to me, and the only thing that made me feel better was playing bass guitar in the jazz band class. Or it was, until our band teacher left. The replacement, Mrs. Rath, was just terrible. I think she tried, but she was not good. My bully ran that class and Rath encouraged it. My bass guitar skills weren't good enough, so I ended up being banished to play Triangle and Jingle Bells. It's a small miracle I didn't kill myself throughout that year, because Lord knows I wanted to. I'll never forget the day she asked us our opinions on a specific piece we were playing, which was objectively horrible. She called on me and I said that I didn't like it. She then yelled at me for being negative and being the worst member of the band until I cried. Fortunately, that was not long. She made me play songs faster and harder until I permanently scarred the tendons in both of my wrists. And whenever my bully decided to lash out at me, Mrs. Rath would watch and laugh. So yeah, Kathy, frick you. I'm glad you got banished to elementary school teaching. I hope I never see you again. Step on Legos for the rest of your life. This reminds me of the movie Whiplash when J.K. Simmons' character ages on the kid when he can't stay perfectly on beat. Starting in sophomore year of HS, every Valentine's Day I would get a secret admirer card in my locker. Being an idiot high school girl, I was super flattered and my friends and I would try and ring our brains to figure out who it was. Finally, come senior year, I get another sweet admirer card, except this year it is sent to my home address and, instead of being handwritten, is typed out and pasted onto the card, with the lyrics from one of my teacher's favorite Bob Dylan songs, Simple Twist of Fate. So turns out my secret admirer all throughout high school was in fact one of my teachers. On top of the secret admirer cards, the day after I graduated he started texting me telling me to get drunk for pillow talk. No thanks, buddy. Idiot high school girl. Yeah, how dare you assume that your secret admirer is in your age group instead of some creepy perv authority figure. Frick, that's insidious. I'm glad you're okay. Friend thought he was funny. We were sitting with one of our teachers. He was a TA, and he decided to show me a new handshake. Go to slap his hand only for him to move it last second, resulting in me slapping this teacher's butt. Frick off, Marshall. I had some mental health issues developing and spent a lot of time out of class with the well-being staff. When someone asked where I was one day, the teacher, who I previously looked up to and had confided in, decided to tell everyone that I was doing terribly and needed help. When I confronted him and said, "Dude, what the frick?" he said he thought it would help so people would be gentle. I do believe he had good intentions, but it did not fricking help. I had a teacher who found out I was B and refused to let anyone sit in the seat next to me at my table. It wasn't like I was in the back of the class, I was dead center front row, and she said it out loud to the class. I hope that teacher got fired. Teacher accused me of being a bad kid, cheating on tests, having ADHD. I made good grades, didn't cheat, went to a psychologist just to tell her for a fact I didn't have it. I was just an admittedly over-talkative and energetic kid, and it wasn't like I was wheeling in my wheelchair to the back of the playground and smoking crack or something. I was a 3rd grader. Lol, she told me to shut up. I had a religion teacher in high school named Mr. Nguyen, who was working on becoming a Jesuit priest and was a really cool guy. He always had a smile on his face and did his best to make class a fun experience for everyone. There was a kid in my class who was a really annoying smart butt, but Mr. Nguyen was always really patient with him, until one day he pushed him too far. I forgot exactly what the kid said, but it definitely crossed the line. Mr. Nguyen slammed his fists on his desk and shouted, "Why can't you ever shut the frick up?" He then picked up his stapler and chucked it at the kid, missing his head by a few inches and leaving a huge dent in the wall, and then stormed out into the hallway. Even though I wasn't the one that got the stapler chucked at him, that was still something crazy to experience. I had never seen a teacher blow up like that, and I definitely never expected it from him. My family moved from the north to Florida when I was going into the 5th grade. My teacher, for some reason, thought this shy, awkward, small town girl needed to be toughened up, basically hazed, by the class. I was so badly teased and isolated that I've blacked out my entire 5th grade from my memory. My mom, who actually worked at his school, said I came home crying every day. She was an underling and tried, but failed, to get me switched to another class. I ended up becoming tougher only after we moved away from that crap hole. Parenting pro tip: the keys are not a good place to raise children, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, and frick you, Mr. Colson. Well, I once had a teacher who would read our test scores in front of the entire class. In the same school, I also had a teacher grab my friend by the ear and pull really hard. His ear was red and hurt the rest of the day. I had a teacher who, when she went around giving tests back to students, would call out every grade as she handed it to the student. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.